Nothing like a little power of incredible apathy to keep you from needing much of anything. Go. Changed. DT, what's going on? What happened? Haberdasher. He was here. He was after Captain Obvious, or whatever his name is. I threw the power of incredible apathy at him and he changed. You mean he changed the apartment? Because I kind of noticed that. No. I mean, yes, he kind of did, but the apartment is a TARDIS. It does that. No, I mean, Haberdasher, he's different. What happened to Arcana? I don't know. Haberdasher threw the power back at me, and then he threw it at him. I was able to absorb it because it's part of me anyway, but I don't know how it affected him. It's the end. But the moment has been prepared for. What? Seems this old body of mine is wearing a bit thin. Wearing a bit what? Feels different this time. What the hell are you talking about? Stand back, both of you. I'm regenerating. Legs! I've still got legs. Good. What in God's name are you talking about, Arcana? Oh, good. I was afraid you wouldn't recognize me, but with my new face and all. You're what? I've regenerated. No, you really haven't. Well, of course I have. New face, new look, new teeth, new me. You look exactly the same. Now, to business. The Haberdasher has changed too, and it looks like he's much more powerful than ever before. We need to figure out what happened to him, how powerful he is, and how to stop him. But first, I need something to eat. No, I need to change. Is this really the time? I'm saving the world, I need a decent shirt. Regenerated? I mean, we're talking about Doctor Who. It's consistent with everything else this nutty channel is doing. We should probably follow him. There. This new outfit matches my new personality much better. Don't you think? Arcana, you haven't regenerated. Your personality is just as annoying as ever. No, you must not call me Arcana. That was my old name. First I was Amish Dumbledore, and then Arcana, and now I shall be known as Wizard Man! Yeah, I'm still gonna call you Arcana. Actually, he does seem a little different. What do you mean? I mean, Arcana was so serious. Doesn't he seem a little different to you? It's probably just delusional. He was hit pretty hard. I have a half-brother! Yeah, fine, whatever. Look, we need to focus on what happened to Haberdasher. He really did change, regenerate, or whatever. Something tells me he's way more dangerous now. It sounds like we need to do a little bit more research on regeneration. It's a television concept, and it's Doctor Who. Perfect for what you've been doing. Let's get to work. Alright, so as we've already mentioned in both of the previous two Doctor Who reviews, regeneration is something that was dreamed up by the writers of Doctor Who in order to ensure that multiple actors could play the role of the Doctor. Basically, when the Doctor is about to die, he regenerates, changes form and personality, but still with all the memories of the previous incarnations of the Doctor, and still, essentially, the Doctor. That's why when you hear people talking about Doctor Who, you'll hear them talking about the 4th Doctor, or the 9th Doctor, or the 11th Doctor. They're talking about different incarnations of the Doctor over time, as well as the actors who played them. Now, regeneration has been explored a lot over the course of the series, and yet it's still a pretty mysterious thing. Every regeneration is unique depending on the situation surrounding it, just like every incarnation of the Doctor is unique. In fact, there's some evidence to suggest that the circumstances surrounding the Doctor's life and the manner of his death have some bearing on the way that he regenerates and the personality that comes out of it. So let's take a look at each regeneration of the Doctor, as well as the regenerations of a few other characters, to see how this idea has evolved over time.
Mexico, we work. What time is it, kids?
A honeymooner!
We're terribly happy to have all of you with us.
Wasn't even called a regeneration at the time. In the first Doctor's final story, The 10th Planet, the Doctor, played by William Hartnell, comments that he feels his body is wearing a bit thin, and he shows signs of being old and tired. After fighting off the Cybermen, the Doctor collapses and we see his face transform into the face of Patrick Troughton, who would play the second Doctor. The process was then called renewal, and at the time it was unclear what exactly had happened. We weren't sure if the Doctor had just gotten younger, or had changed his appearance but was still the same guy, or whether he had turned into a completely different person. Over time, however, a new personality emerged. Younger, more energetic, and in many ways sillier, but with still the same cleverness, curiosity, and compassion of the first Doctor. At the time, very little was known, or even really made of this process. It was only mentioned that it was a function of the TARDIS, which is something that will become important later. Clearly the Doctor was younger and more energetic after his body had worn a bit thin, but he was also far less of a curmudgeon, showing much more affection for his companions during his travels. The first Doctor, who started the series distrustful of humans and reluctant to take them on as companions, gradually became a father figure to his companions and showed a great deal of affection for them in his own way, and the second Doctor's warmer personality could be seen as an extension of that growth. The second Doctor's regeneration was also not referred to as a regeneration at the time, and there was even some question as to whether it constituted a regeneration at all. The second Doctor is put on trial by his race, the Time Lords, and found guilty of interfering in the lives of humans, something that Time Lords are not supposed to do. His punishment is exile to Earth and what the Time Lords referred to as a change in appearance. Though this was later confirmed as an official regeneration, there was some question again as to whether this was the same guy, just with a different face. But once again, a new personality emerged for the third Doctor, one that was more serious than the second Doctor, and also more proactive when it came to fighting off his enemies. This Doctor, played by Jon Pertwee, knew martial arts and was as likely to engage an enemy physically as he was mentally. The third Doctor was also fascinated by gadgets, riding around in an automobile named Bessie, developing the sonic screwdriver, and always tinkering at something. And if we consider that this regeneration was a forced regeneration, these traits make a certain amount of sense. Think about it, both the Doctor and the Time Lords knew that he was about to be exiled to Earth. Since he couldn't resort to his usual trick of just running off to the TARDIS and flying away when things got bad, he had to have more physical power at his disposal, and it makes sense for him to have an affinity for technology as well. And it was about this time that it became clear that these were not just changes in appearance, but actually changes in personality. This was solidified in the 10th anniversary special, The Three Doctors, which shows the first three incarnations of the Doctor actually interacting with each other. This was actually the first episode of Doctor Who I ever watched, and it was really fun watching these three different personalities come together. After this, there really was no going back. The third Doctor's transformation into the fourth Doctor, played by Tom Baker, was the first time that the process was actually referred to as regeneration, and really the first time that we learned something about the process other than the Doctor changes his appearance sometimes. It's really here that the regeneration process is established as both a change in appearance and personality that happens when the Doctor is about to die. This is also one of the regenerations where the Doctor needs a little bit of help because he dies outside of the TARDIS. This regeneration also marks one of the more severe changes in personality with the Doctor. Though his exile was eventually lifted and the Third Doctor was able to fly through the TARDIS again, he had grown rather fond of his work on Earth and continued to work there and maintain contact with his companions. He had also become something of a father figure to his companions, and in fact died in order to save innocent lives. The Fourth Doctor, on the other hand, made it very clear from the get-go that he had no intention of staying on Earth or working with humans, and he proved to be a much more distant and aloof figure than the Third Doctor. He still showed a great deal of affection for his companions and admiration for humanity in general, but he also had far less patience with their stupidity. In fact, we see him for a decent length of time traveling with non-human companions only, both the robot K9 and the Time Lord, Time Lady rather, Romana. It's also worth mentioning that the regeneration from the Third Doctor to the Fourth Doctor is the first regeneration where the Doctor is actually killed. Not died of old age or had a regeneration forced on him, but actually killed. This may also account for the rather severe change in personality and the Doctor's unwillingness to work either with humans or with the Time Lords. There's also the matter of his appearance. While the Third Doctor dressed, as was once said in an episode, like a dandy with his frilled shirts and his long tailcoats, the Fourth Doctor took on a more bohemian appearance with his long coat, his hat, and of course his trademark scarf. Tom Baker also played a much more expressive and comedic Doctor as opposed to the more reserved and serious Jon Pertwee. Now Tom Baker's Doctor of course wouldn't regenerate for another 7 years, but there were a few regenerations during his time that are worth mentioning. For example, during the Third Doctor's tenure, the Master is introduced, a renegade Time Lord who proves to be one of the Doctor's biggest and cleverest rivals. Now, Roger Delgado, the original actor who played the Master, died before the end of Jon Pertwee's run as the Doctor, but they brought back the Master during the Tom Baker years, depicting him as a decrepit shell of a man who had reached the very end of his 13th life, as it is established that a Time Lord can only regenerate 12 times. Most of the time. There are, of course, exceptions to this rule, many of them involving the Master himself, who first tries to extend his life by taking over the body of another. And during the Fifth Doctor's time, the Time Lords actually offer the Master a new set of regenerations, suggesting that regenerations are, to some extent, transferable. We see this again in a number of stories where characters talk about stealing or losing regenerations. The Doctor's companion Romana also regenerates during the series, and we see her trying out a number of different forms before she settles on one that she likes, which suggests that Time Lords can have a certain amount of control over their regeneration and how, at least, they look. Tom Baker's last season revolves around an enemy known as Entropy. No, not that Entropy. More abstract. And as such, the stories are all about death and decay, specifically with the Doctor being very, very aware of his own mortality. In Tom Baker's final episode, Legopolis, the Doctor and his companions are followed by a mysterious figure known as the Watcher, and even though the Doctor doesn't say it, he knows who the Watcher is, his own future regeneration, and what that means. He's gonna die soon. This is another death that occurs outside of the TARDIS, which is why he needs the Watcher to regenerate at all. As the Fourth Doctor dies, he sees the faces of his enemies and his companions calling out his name. And when he regenerates, we see the Fifth Doctor, played by Peter Davison, he is young, far younger than any of the previous incarnations of the Doctor, possibly the Doctor's unconscious attempt to compensate for his own mortality. We also see the Fifth Doctor relying more and more on his companions, often being unsure how to act and not being as proactive as before. For the first time, the Doctor seems vulnerable, hesitant, as if afraid to act. The Fourth Doctor's regeneration into the Fifth is itself uncertain, with some doubt as to whether the regeneration will even work out at all. The Fifth Doctor faces a great deal of tragedy in his travels, with a lot of unhappy or unsatisfactory endings, and the death of Adric, one of his companions. In his final episode, the Doctor and his companion, Perry, are both poisoned, and there's only enough antidote for one of them. His last episode, then, is one where everything goes horribly wrong from the start, but the Doctor sacrifices himself in order to save his companion, again expressing some doubt as to whether this regeneration will work out. He also sees the faces of his companions before he dies, begging him to pull through, but all of them are eventually drowned out by the face of the Master, who encourages him to die. This, if anything, seems to shape the Doctor's 6th incarnation, played by Colin Baker. This is a much brasher and harsher incarnation of the Doctor, who even expresses dislike for the 5th Doctor's personality. There are also problems with this regeneration, with the Doctor turning paranoid and nearly killing his companion. A lot of people didn't really care for Colin Baker's portrayal of the Doctor, and I can kind of see where they're coming from. It's another big shift in personality. Colin Baker isn't the vulnerable and passive personality that Peter Davison was. But this incarnation of the Doctor also demonstrates a great deal of passion, particularly in the season-long story arc, The Trial of the Time Lord, which incidentally has another weird bit of regeneration business in it with the Valeyard, who is all the darkest aspects of the Doctor in one kind of weird final regeneration. I don't know, it's really weird. Now, the reasons for the 6th Doctor's death and regeneration are never really made clear, as Colin Baker was unwilling to shoot a regeneration scene, but regardless, he died. The 7th Doctor sees a return of the bumbling father figure again, with a gentler and more subtle incarnation of the Doctor. But Sylvester McCoy's stories also reinforce the mysteriousness of the Doctor and just how long this character has been alive. The Doctor is now halfway through his regenerations, and we see a lot of stories with him trying to tie up loose ends. It seems that the Doctor, far from just making things up as he goes along, has a very specific agenda in mind and is going around to these various places trying to finish things that he's started. It's like he's trying to complete his life's work now that he's about halfway through it, a sort of Time Lord midlife crisis, if you will. Now, as we've already discussed, the regeneration from the 7th Doctor into the 8th Doctor is quite possibly the lamest regeneration ever, but it does raise some interesting questions. The Doctor actually seems to be dead for quite some time before regenerating, once again outside of the TARDIS, and he actually comes back to life after gaining his new body, now played by Paul McGann. Now, the 8th Doctor saw a great deal of life in novelizations and audio dramas, and he was a very affectionate and energetic personality. The 8th Doctor was really the first Doctor to show overt romantic feelings for a companion, something that they tried to avoid with the first 7 incarnations, particularly Doctor 5. Before, the relationship had always been fatherly or brotherly, but the 8th Doctor has a romantic side, and in general, he seems to enjoy life a lot more than his previous incarnations. Possibly because his most recent regeneration was the closest that he ever came to actually dying before regenerating. Now, for a long time, audiences knew nothing about Doctor 8's regeneration into Doctor 9. When the series rebooted in 2005, Chris Eccleston just kind of showed up and proclaimed himself as the Doctor. There was no real indication of where he had come from, aside from a very subtle indication that he had regenerated relatively recently and hadn't really had a chance to look at himself yet. However, the 50th anniversary episode of Doctor Who showed us that there was in fact another regeneration of the Doctor between Doctors 8 and 9, referred to as the War Doctor, and not even referred to as the Doctor by the other incarnations, hence the inaccurate numbers. A short web-based video with Paul McGann reprising his role as the 8th Doctor in only his 2nd television appearance shows us that regeneration. The 8th Doctor dies in a crash, but is revived and given the chance to regenerate into a warrior, someone who can win the ongoing Time War. This establishes something that has really only been hinted at in previous episodes, that the Doctor does have control over what he can regenerate into. The War Doctor is the warrior who ends the Time War, and at the end of it, he essentially dies of old age, even talking about his body wearing a bit thin like the 1st Doctor, and regenerates into the much more abrasive 9th Doctor, who carries a great deal of baggage. Not only is he the last of the Time Lords, but he's also responsible for what happened to the Time Lords. Now, though the 9th Doctor only lasted for 1 season, he shows a great deal of character growth, going from a very abrasive and broken man to having compassion again, specifically for his companion Rose. Though he never says that the 9th Doctor falls in love with Rose, and when he dies, happy with his life and everything that he's done with it, he turns into the very person that Rose can love back. David Tennant's 10th Doctor. Young, energetic, and filled with that same compassion that the 9th Doctor was able to learn. Now, Dr. 10 actually technically went through 2 regenerations. The first time, he used his regeneration energy to heal himself and then transferred the rest of that energy into his severed hand before he could change his appearance, which is only slightly less confusing if you have the context. The second time, however, he receives a handful of prophecies about his upcoming demise, and the final episode revolves around his fear of dying and how he doesn't want to stop being the 10th Doctor. Much like Tom Baker, David Tennant was a very popular Doctor, and his departure from the show was pretty built up. Ten spends his last few hours of existence traveling around to his different companions and saying goodbye to them, and in a way, it really is goodbye. The 11th Doctor, played by Matt Smith, doesn't really go back and revisit any of his old companions that much. He just kind of goes off on a new adventure and never really looks back. So the 10th Doctor's regeneration is a reluctant one. And this scene becomes even more poignant when you realize that if you count the aborted regeneration and the War Doctor regeneration, this is his 12th and final regeneration. This is the last life he'll ever have. Or so you would think. Matt Smith's Doctor is the youngest in appearance and by far the dorkiest, becoming the goofy bumbler again, but you also really get the sense of his ancientness. Behind the goofiness is the intensity of a person who has lived for a very, very long time. Now obviously we didn't know that this was going to be his last regeneration at the time, but watching those episodes again, you really do get the sense that the 11th Doctor sees this life as his last hurrah, his last chance to play the Protector and do something for the universe, and also have a bit of fun while he's at it. And yet, there's sadness to this portrayal as well, a regret for the life that he's lost, and fear of the day when he'll no longer be able to regenerate. And it could have all ended there. I mean, it's well established that a Time Lord only gets 12 regenerations. It's been ingrained in the collective consciousness of the Who fandom, and I think that fans would have accepted the series ending there with the death of the 11th Doctor. And maybe the show should have ended at 50. But something this popular does not easily die, as the original cancellation in 1989 showed us, and so the Doctor is granted a whole new set of regenerations, because he's just a good guy, I guess, and Matt Smith dies a very, very old man and regenerates into Peter Capaldi. And honestly, I'd be lying if I said I didn't kind of wish that the series had ended with Matt Smith. And this is without having seen any of the episodes with Peter Capaldi in them. I honestly haven't watched any of them, so I'm not basing this on his portrayal of the Doctor or anything like that. I'm sure it's fine. I'm basing this on the fact that this first set of regenerations is kind of a complete story arc. As much as the Doctor changes from regeneration to regeneration, he's still the Doctor. We get that it's still the same guy, just with a new face and personality. There are parts of him that are consistent, like his compassion for humans, or his curiosity, or his boundless energy, or cleverness. And when you think about it, it's really not too much different from the way that people actually age. I can look at myself now and say that I'm a different person than I was 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 20. People change as they get older, and though parts of them will remain consistent throughout their lives, they become essentially different people. They regenerate too, just without all the special effects. And we get to see the Doctor at different phases in a very, very long life. It's actually kind of funny that the first Doctor is treated sort of as the patriarch of the whole group, in spite of the fact that he's technically the youngest Doctor. There's a mini-sode that was done for charity with Doctors 5 and 10 together that actually gives a really nice explanation for this phenomenon. It says that when you're young, you try to act like you're older and more important than you are, and so maybe that's why the first few incarnations of the Doctor are older men. But as the Doctor grows older, he sees the benefits of being younger. It's no accident that his last regeneration of this first cycle of regenerations is the youngest. The Doctor is a fascinating character to us, I think, because he represents how a person can change over time and become a different person and yet still stay the same. And I think that no matter how many more regenerations the Doctor gets over the years, I will still come back to this very first set of 12 regenerations as my Doctor. How is that? Good analysis. You are overlooking one thing, though. What's that? Arcana's not a Time Lord. Neither is Haberdasher. So how could they regenerate? Maybe they didn't. Maybe they just changed and we're just calling it that. Maybe. But you know, it's not unprecedented for either one of them, though. What do you mean? Well, think about it. Before Arcana was Arcana, he was Amish Dumbledore. You remember he had that horrible wizard costume with the fake beard, and then during the Lord of the Rings review, he turned into Arcana. And the Haberdasher, he was just kind of that amorphous figure in the white hoodie, and then he stole Hatter's hats and became the evil Haberdasher. And now it looks like he's stolen your power of incredible apathy and changed it again. So what? What does it mean? Not sure. I'm still working on it. I'm gonna have to do a bit more analysis on this. Swell, Reg, you do that. In the meantime, though, we've got another little problem. Our human deus ex machina. Captain Obvious? What about him? He's not Captain Obvious. He becomes whatever's needed by whoever needs him. We had him standing in for you and Hatter while you were gone, and let's just say that if we don't find a use for him, Haberdasher will. Got some ideas.